Welcome back to Mr. Horror Global. Tonight's story comes from a friend I'll call Daniel, a man who rode an overnight coach to buy a cheap house in the country, woke to find his bags gone, and accepted a ride from a stranger who already knew the way. Viewer discretion advised. The Woman in Yellow. Let me tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine. I'll call him Daniel, and I'll tell it the way he told me. The one time he ever told it, late, after too much to drink. This was years ago, back when he was young enough to think the worst thing that could happen to a man on a night bus was losing his luggage. Daniel had taken an overnight coach out of the city, headed for a small town in the country, and he had two reasons. One was an old friend out there, a fellow named Mark. The other was a house. He'd heard there was a property for sale in that town, going cheap, and Daniel had been saving for years with the idea of buying a place of his own somewhere the air was clean. So he boarded the late coach with everything he owned in 2 bags, his clothes, his papers, what money he had, and somewhere in the dark, with the road humming under him, he fell asleep. When he woke, the bus was empty, and the driver was shaking his shoulder. End of the line, everyone off, and his 2 bags were gone. Not misplaced, gone, off the rack above his head, as if they'd never been there at all. All he had left was the little in his pockets. He climbed down onto a black stretch of road with no town in sight, just fields and the racket of insects, and he stood there trying to work out how a man with no bags and almost no money was going to get through a night in a place he didn't know. That's when he saw the headlights. A car had pulled over a little way up the road, and a woman's voice called out to him, clear as a struck glass. "Where are you going? Come on, get in." He hesitated, a woman alone at that hour, but she leaned across and pushed the door open, and in the dashboard light he could see she was young and lovely, dressed all in yellow. The car itself was yellow. "If you've got no money, you'll be sleeping in a ditch," she said. "Get in." So he got in, and the first thing he saw on the back seat were 2 bags. Black plastic bags. His bags. "Take a look," she said, watching the road. "Are those yours?" He turned, and yes, those were his, the very ones that had vanished off the bus. That's mine," he said. "How did you—" She only smiled and spoke almost to herself. "I forgot," she said, "that I was carrying 2 things that weren't mine." He asked her where she'd found them, how, and she didn't answer. She lifted one hand off the wheel and pointed straight ahead into the dark. "Up there, that's where you need to go." And here's the thing that turned his stomach cold. Later, when he had time to think about it, she drove him straight to Mark's house. He never gave her an address. He never told her a name, a street, a thing, but she pulled up right at the gate, put the car in park, and waited while he carried his 2 bags inside. He looked back to thank her, and the yellow car was already pulling away into the dark. When Mark came to the door, Daniel was almost laughing with relief, telling him all of it. The lost bags, the woman, the yellow car, how she'd somehow known the way. Mark asked who she was. Daniel didn't know. He hadn't even gotten her name. A day or 2 later, Mark took him to see the house, the one Daniel had come all that way to look at. It belonged to an old man named Gerald, who lived there alone except for an old caretaker. The place had been on the market a full year, but Gerald couldn't seem to part with it. When they sat down together, the old man said, almost to himself, "Since my wife passed, nothing means much to me anymore. As long as I'm in this house, I remember her, every day, our whole life. One day soon I'll just follow her." There was a small altar at the back of the room, the way people keep for the dead, with incense and a framed photograph. Daniel, trying to be respectful, asked, "Would you allow me to light a stick of incense for your wife?" The old man nodded, touched. "Please, go ahead, thank you." So Daniel went to the altar, lit the incense, looked up at the photograph, and the floor dropped out from under him. It was her, the woman in yellow, the woman from the car. Who is this?" he said. His voice came out wrong. The old man said her name, Vivian. And before Daniel could stop himself, it was out of his mouth. "I met her 2 nights ago. She gave me a ride. Yellow car, yellow dress. She found my bags." The old man went white. He came up out of his chair. You what? You met her in a yellow car? In yellow?" And then he was shouting, "That's a lie! That's a lie!" Mark stepped between them, trying to calm it down, explaining Daniel had come in on the overnight coach. His bags had gone missing. A woman in a yellow car had brought him to the house, and she had looked exactly like the woman in that photograph. And the old man just kept saying her name over and over until he cried out, "Get out, everyone, out of my house, now!" So they left. Mark half carried Daniel out the door. Back at his place, Daniel sat shaking because Mark had finally told him the rest. The woman in that photograph, Vivian, had been dead 4 years. Daniel should have gone home right then. He didn't. Mark had business of his own and went back to the city for a few days, and Daniel stayed on. Maybe he still wanted that house. Maybe he just couldn't leave a thing half finished. He kept thinking about his lost belongings too, the clothes he'd never gotten back. 3 days went by. On the 3rd morning, he told Mark over the phone that he'd catch the bus back to the city that night. And that's when the yellow car came back. He was waiting outside when it pulled up, and his heart went sideways, but when the window came down, it wasn't her. It was the old man, Gerald, driving his dead wife's yellow car himself. He leaned over and opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said. "There's something I want to say to you." Daniel got in. The old man turned the car around and drove him back toward the house, the same house, and on the way he said, quietly, "Come back with me. I want to talk about the sale, about you buying it." Daniel wanted to ask 100 things, but the old man had gone strange and still, and the whole ride passed in silence. At the house, the caretaker was nowhere to be seen. Gerald unlocked the door himself. "Tonight it's just the 2 of us," he said. He'd laid out a meal and wine, 2 cups. Daniel hadn't asked anything, but the old man answered him anyway. "I live alone here. I wanted to make you welcome, and I want to apologize for how I behaved the other day. I shouldn't have. Please, sit, drink." So they drank. The 2 of them sat there a long while, and the night got deeper, and Daniel, who'd had more than he meant to, felt the room go soft and far away. At some point Gerald wasn't there anymore, or Daniel could no longer tell. Half an hour, he couldn't say. He set down his glass. And in the dark, a hand touched him. On his arm, then sliding across his chest, and it was cold. Cold like something pulled out of a river, and something came off that hand and ran all through his body, a kind of current, and he found he couldn't move, couldn't pull away. He turned, and there was a woman beside him in the dark. He knew her before he could see her. "It's you," he said. "Isn't it?" She smiled, that same lovely watching smile. "Who else would it be? Say my name. Vivian." You remember?" Then she took his hand and pulled hard. The hand was ice, but that current dragged him up after her whether he wanted to go or not. She pulled him into a back room and said, flat and cold, "You're going to help me. You're going to make him pay for what he did to me, for what he did to my whole life, and you're going to love me." Daniel was terrified now. "No," he said. "No, I can't, no." She gripped tighter. He couldn't get loose. He started babbling, he'll kill me if he finds out." And she laughed. "Are you afraid of him?" she said. "Of that old man? Tell me, between the two of us, him and me, which one do you really think you should be afraid of?" And Daniel couldn't answer. He shut his eyes. Then she told him things. In that soft, dead voice, holding his hand, she told him how she had died in that house, and how it had not been a kindness or an accident, what the old man had done to her and to her family, how her own parents had been destroyed, how she had suffered. Daniel never repeated all of it. She said, "You're shut in this room, and you can't do a single thing to stop me, and you call yourself a man." And Daniel, I don't know where he found it, said, "When I'm beside you, I'm not afraid of him at all. But I'll tell you the truth. Right now, it's you I'm afraid of." That seemed to please her, in its way. She told him she had no quarrel with him, that what she meant to do she would do, with him or without him, with his blessing or without it, that once Vivian wanted a thing, there was no one living or dead who could take it from her. And then she was gone. The perfume that had filled the room went with her, and in its place came another smell, a bad smell, a wrong smell, the smell of something that has been a long time in the ground. He called out into the dark, "Wait, Vivian." Nothing answered. The next thing he knew, someone was shaking him and crying out, and Daniel jerked awake to find the old caretaker standing over him, white as a sheet, staring at him the way you'd stare at a corpse that had sat up. "What's wrong with you?" Daniel managed. "That's my question to ask you," the caretaker said. "What happened to you here? Are you all right?" Daniel didn't want to speak of Vivian. He only said, "I was here with the master. We talked about the house. He laid out a meal and we drank. You weren't here?" And the caretaker said a thing that turned his blood to water. "The master," he said, "has been dead a long time." Daniel couldn't speak. The caretaker sat down heavily, and it all came out of him. He said the master Gerald had died and would not stay dead, that his ghost raged through the house, that it had tormented the caretaker half to death, until at last the old servant had dug up Gerald's bones with his own hands and put them back where they belonged, in the proper place, with the proper rites, and only then had the thing let him have any peace. And he told Daniel the rest. 4 years ago, Gerald's wife Vivian had suddenly fallen ill and died. The old man had gone mad with it, weeping and drinking, but, and here the caretaker dropped his voice, it had never been a simple illness. There had been something done, something the old man had done, to her and to her people. Her parents were dead too. The whole of it had been buried, the way the bones had been buried, and the only ones who knew the truth of it were the dead. Daniel stumbled out of that house and walked until, he could never say how he got there, he found himself in front of another house, with an older woman standing in the doorway, looking at him as though she'd been expecting him. "You're here," she said. "Why didn't you bring your bags?" He didn't understand, and then she told him she was Vivian's mother. He should have run. Vivian's parents were dead. The caretaker had just said so. But he stood rooted there, and the woman went inside and came back with a folder of papers and pressed it into his hands. It was the deed to the property. Gerald's house. And the name on every page, the buyer, the new owner, signed and notarized, was Daniel's own full legal name, in full, a name he had never once spoken aloud in that town. "This belongs to you now," she said. He asked her how any of it, and she told him. Vivian had decided long ago that the house would go to Daniel, and only to Daniel. She had ridden the night coach out of the city to find him. She had sat in the dark beside him while he slept. She had taken his 2 bags so she could slip the papers inside, and then she had given them back to him on the road. Everything she meant for him to have, she had tucked into that luggage. "She knew you were coming to buy a house," the old woman said. "She wanted you to have hers, because she knew that otherwise it would pass to that old man's family, and there was no stopping that, not while she was only a photograph on an altar. So she made certain of it. She put your name on everything." And then, with something almost like bitterness, she said, "I've asked her, why not leave it to me or to his people and be done? But she only ever says the same thing, that she loves you, that you and she were bound to one another before either of you was born, that whatever the price, she will give it to no one but you." And Daniel stood there with the deed heavy in his hands, not knowing whether to take it or run. The caretaker had told him one last thing before they parted. "It's not as it was," he'd said. "It's changed now. Go back there, and you'll see for yourself." So Daniel went back, one final time. The door stood open, and what he saw inside he could never afterward put in order, only in pieces. The old caretaker was there, dragging something heavy out across the threshold, something the shape of a man, and Daniel understood, without being told, that there had been a struggle in that house, a struggle between the dead. The old man, Gerald, or whatever was left of him, had refused to let the house pass to a stranger. He had held onto it with both hands, the way a drowning man holds a rope, but something stronger had pried his fingers loose, one by one, until he couldn't hold it any longer. And now his hands were still. "The house is free," the caretaker said, not looking at him. "If you don't mean to fight for it, walk right in. She's waiting for you." And she was. In the far room, in the dark, a woman sat waiting, and it was Vivian. She looked alive. She looked more alive than anyone in that whole town. She smiled at him, that lovely watching smile, almost shy. "I'm still a ghost," she said softly, "but from now on, you belong only to me. And then, just look at me, and whenever you need me, come back to me like this." So Daniel looked at her. He looked at her face, and as he looked, it changed. The skin went gray, and then to earth. The bright eyes sank back. The beauty ran off her like water off glass, and the sweet perfume soured into the smell of a thing 4 years in the ground, until what sat smiling at him in the dark was no woman at all. Daniel got his house. That's the part people don't believe, or don't want to. He got the property he'd come all that way for, signed and notarized in his own full name for almost nothing, the bargain of a lifetime, anyone would tell you, and he lives there still, as far as I know. He just doesn't live there alone. He told me that some nights, when he's nearly under, a hand finds his in the dark, and it's cold, cold as river water, and he doesn't dare open his eyes, because he knows what's smiling at him, and he knows it chose him a long time ago, before he ever set foot on that bus. "The dead don't always want to frighten you," he said. "Sometimes they only want what you have. And sometimes," and this was the last thing he said, before he set his glass down and went quiet, "sometimes what they want is you."